just miles from the Chinese border, a potential launch site for ICBMs.
We need to understand there is no military solution.
Former U.S. Ambassador and Special Envoy to North Korea, Joseph Yoon, believes the only option is for President Biden to take a page from the playbook of former President Trump and reach out directly to Kim Jong-un.
The longer this situation continues, more serious will the provocations be.
He says diplomacy may be the only way to keep the missiles from flying, to keep America safe. Will Ripley, CNN, Taipei.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield, and I'm also joined by my colleague John Berman in Lviv, Ukraine. More than a month into this invasion into Ukraine, and now a potential new stage of the conflict happening on the ground. Ukrainian officials say their forces have launched a series of new counterattacks, liberating some villages in eastern Ukraine that had been taken over by Russian forces. Meanwhile, Russia is carrying out new assaults on western Ukraine, which has largely been spared from the bombing so far. Emergency crews finally putting out flames at a fuel depot in Lviv, hit by a Russian airstrike yesterday. And Russia's Ministry of Defense confirming the attacks on Lviv. Ukrainians continue to flee the carnage. On Saturday alone, more than 5,200 escaping through humanitarian corridors, most of them from the besieged city of Mariupol. The UN says more than 3.8 million refugees have now fled to other countries. President Joe Biden now back in the U.S. after sending shockwaves at the end of his whirlwind European trip, saying Russia's Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. The White House quickly clarifying those remarks. We'll have more in a live report in just a bit. But first, let's go to CNN's John Berman, who is anchoring our coverage from Lviv, Ukraine. And so glad, John, it remains quiet, quite the contrast to yesterday.
Yeah, indeed. Quiet here in the western part of Ukraine, in Lviv. No strikes here today. The fires are out, but a lot of activity elsewhere. And the Ukrainians, the people you talk to on the streets, they're so proud of the efforts being made by the Ukrainian military, and the Ukrainian government continues to tout successes on the battlefield. Joining me now here in Lviv is CNN's Salma Abdulaziz. And Salma, look, we have no way to confirm all the information the Ukrainian government gives us, but they give us all these examples of towns that they've partially retaken, Russian equipment that they say they've destroyed.
Right, so we're seeing this counteroffensive that's been described as nimble, as creative, as tactical, able to make small gains, take some villages back. I think the most significant thing they've been able to do is really slow the advance of Russian forces, particularly in the east of the country. In areas like Kharkiv, we know that counteroffensives are trying to take back some suburbs. Also in the southeast of the country, north of Mariupol, also some small gains there. You hear this word stalemate being thrown around, but this is not a stalemate. It's a war of attrition. What it means is the fault lines are shifting only slightly, but the people stuck in the middle on those fault lines, the civilians, the residents, the homes, they're being bombarded. They're caught between two sides. They have no relief. And that's the fear here, is as Russia starts to switch strategies, using these long-range missiles to try to target places here in Lviv, hitting military infrastructure to try to cut supply routes, not able to advance, but still shelling indiscriminately civilian areas, you have this grinding conflict that really drains these communities.
And look, as you say, the status quo, if you're in Mariupol, the status quo is hell, living hell. So they need something to change in their favor. There are these talks that have been going on and off for the last month. There is a new round tomorrow.
Absolutely. So this is going to be the fifth round of talks. In Turkey, President Erdogan has really been a key mediator. He's been someone that President Putin has spoken to, who he has articulated his demands to. And based on those conversations, we are nowhere near this conflict ending. You can't imagine President Putin really agreeing to lay down arms right now when he's just announced yet another phase of this operation. So you're going to have to wonder, what can these talks really accomplish? And you also do have the second phase of the operation that's been announced here. So what does that look like on the ground for these civilians? What concessions is President Putin willing to give, if at all? And we already heard that in the Luhansk, one of these separatist regions, they're going to potentially hold a referendum. So the war grinds on, and all of this maneuvering to gain that territory Putin wants, it's still happening.
Sam Abdulaziz, thank you so much for reporting. Great to have you here. So Ukrainian forces are still in control of Kyiv even as the shelling continues near the capital. CNN's Frederick Pleiken is there with more.
Hi there, John. Well, look, I would say by and large, maybe today was a little bit more quiet than what we've seen over the past couple of days, especially this week. However, there were still those air raid sirens that were going off. We heard some shelling. We also heard some automatic weapons fire as well. And, you know, that could be in part due to the fact that the Ukrainians are saying that they're pressing those counteroffensives to try and push Russian forces back. A lot of that is happening towards the northwest of the city, but also towards the northeast of the city as well. And what we saw today is we managed to get up to a small town, a village, to the north of Kiev, and the people who live there, the few that are still remaining, they tell us that Russian forces really haven't been able to advance at all over the past couple of weeks. But what they're doing now is they're increasingly shelling that area. We saw a bunch of houses that were destroyed, and of course, in that situation, it's completely unsafe for the people who are still in that village. Nevertheless, Ukrainian forces seem to be confident that they're going to be able to hold the Russians at bay and possibly push them back even further, even though their leadership understands that the gains that they've made are still very fragile, and they can, of course, be reversed because the Russian army remains one that is very powerful, very dangerous as well, John.
All right, our thanks to Frederick Pleiken in Kyiv. Thank you, Fred. I want to bring in retired Colonel Cedric Leighton. He's a CNN military analyst and retired Air Force colonel. Want to start with Kyiv. We just heard Frederick Pleiken talking about that. Insofar as the Ukrainians have made some gains there, do you feel as if it is sustainable?
I certainly think so, John, but it's not sustainable yet. There are a lot of things that the Ukrainians have to worry about. You know, well, of course, supply and resupply efforts being among those, but also they have to worry about a Russian counterattack. We've all heard the Russians say they're shifting their focus, but I'd be very careful about believing that. I think what the Ukrainians need to do is to make very sure that they are not caught by surprise. By any ambushes or any efforts to encircle pockets of Ukrainian forces as they move forward into, the villages in and around, the Kyiv metropolitan area. And that becomes, I think, the biggest concern. They certainly can move forward, but they have to be very, very careful doing so.
You heard the Russians discuss the idea of this next phase of the campaign focusing on the east. And then over the weekend, a Ukrainian official says that he is concerned what the Russians might try to do is to create a situation like the Korean Peninsula, where the Russians could control a section of the country they fear or try to in perpetuity. What do you think of that, Colonel?
Well, I think it's certainly a possibility. Obviously, there's precedent for that, not only with Korea, but also, with Germany for a while, and that, after World War II. So there are certain, certain precedents there that could happen, and particularly in the east, you would see them probably taking the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, in other words, the Donbas area, possibly trying to extend it, from a Russian perspective, extend control over all of that area. That could happen. There's also a natural boundary between East and West Ukraine, and that's the Dnipro River, the one that goes all the way from Kyiv down to the Black Sea coast. That could potentially be a demarcation line as well, but I don't think the Russian forces are in a position to grab that much territory, at least not at present. But that's, I think, kind of what they're thinking, and that would not be good for Ukraine and for the continued viability of the country economically or politically.
Colonel, President Biden said yesterday at the end of his speech in Warsaw, he said of Vladimir Putin, this man cannot remain in power. There are political arguments about whether that was a wise thing to say or not. Do you feel as if there are any military implications of that statement on the ground in Ukraine?
There certainly can be, John, and the way I would look at it from a military perspective is that if that is the stated policy of the government, of the U.S. government, and I know they've walked it back, but let's say for argument's sake that it were to be the policy, that would certainly widen the conflict and could potentially move NATO and U.S. forces into direct conflict with Russia. the planning that would have to go into something like that, and the fact that a few laws would have to be changed, of course, would also factor into this. So, from a military perspective, we probably shouldn't take it as a face value type statement, but it is certainly a significant indication of what President Biden really feels, and probably what a lot of Americans actually feel, vis-a-vis Putin.
So 24 hours at this time, Colonel, I was sitting here and there was smoke rising behind me. There was this missile strike from the Russians on this fuel storage depot. What does that tell you? Is this the Russians showing what they can do, or is it the Russians revealing, in some ways, the limitations of their capabilities at this point?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, actually, John. It certainly shows what they can do, using precision-guided munitions, to attack that oil storage facility in Lviv. They've done similar things near Kyiv the day before the one that you saw personally. So there are these kinds of attacks. They also are going after other elements of the Ukrainian infrastructure. So they can certainly do this. They can certainly cause damage, but they're not doing it on a sustained basis. When the U.S. performs or conducts an air campaign, it's a very sustained, very robust effort. We haven't seen that kind of an effort from the Russians, at least not to date. And it leads me to believe that there are limitations to not only the amount of precision-guided munitions that they have available, but also to their ability to sustain those kinds of operations over a longer period. I think that's lacking, and I think we're seeing that right now.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. We always end up learning so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Great to be with you.
So coming up, President Biden seemed to call for regime change in Russia on that dramatic final day of his critical trip to Europe. Now the White House is walking back those comments. Live to the White House next.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
The Santos de Cartier. Now, the story goes that in early 20th century Paris, Louis Cartier of the famous jewelry clan had a Brazilian friend, Alberto Santos Dumont. Santos Dumont was one of the pioneers of aviation, but Louis Cartier often heard him complain about the fact that checking your time when you were flying one of the planes of those days, for which you needed both hands, was very difficult when all you have is a pocket watch. So after a while, Louis Cartier presents Santos Dumont with one of the first ever purpose-built wristwatches, and that watch has come down to us as the Santos de Cartier. If you look at this watch, with its squarish profiles, with its exposed screws, what you see are the skills of a master jeweler transferred to watchmaking.
We're open for business like any other country in the world, I think. Not only open for business, but prepared for business, because we understand that there are needs from the consumers, like safety, especially in health. We've been training 160,000 people in Portugal. 23,000 establishments are ready to welcome with safety measures. We need, first, clear coordination and very clear communication, because we're dealing with people, and we need to reinstore confidence. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to think that mobility is crucial for any economy. And now once again that we have made such a huge evolution controlling this pandemic, the effects of being contaminated. Now it's the time to balance mobility with protecting our population and our tourists.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally, this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
President Biden is back in Washington, D.C. after wrapping up his critical trip to Europe with Western allies. The president also delivering a major speech from Poland's royal castle, which seemed to call for regime change in Russia.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Let's bring in CNN's Arlette Saenz at the White House. So, Arlette, the White House responding, defining those comments in a different way.
Yeah, Fred, this was a very carefully crafted speech from President Biden as he was laying out the stakes of what is occurring in Ukraine at this moment. But it was just 9 words that President Biden uttered that really threw everything off script, surprising many of his aides when the president seemed to suggest that he wanted to see regime change in Russia. Now, even before President Biden departed Poland, the White House sought to clarify and walk back those comments, saying that that's not exactly what the president meant. And that is something that was reiterated by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, a bit earlier today.
The president, the White House, made the point last night that, quite simply, President Putin cannot be empowered to wage war or engage in aggression against Ukraine or anyone else. As you know, and as you've heard us say repeatedly, we do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter. In this case, as in any case, it's up to the people of the country in question. It's up to the Russian people.
But still, those comments from President Biden reverberated around the world very quickly, drawing a quick response from the Russian government itself, with a spokesperson saying that regime, who is in power in Russia, is not a decision for President Biden to make, but one for the Russian people to make. And here in the U.S., President Biden has also seen some criticism from Republican lawmakers, including Senator James Risch, the ranking member on the Senate and Foreign Relations Committee. Take a listen to what he said earlier today.
Anytime you say, or even as he did, suggest that the policy was regime change, it's going to cause a huge problem. This administration has done everything they can to stop escalating. There's not a whole lot more you can do to escalate than to call for regime change.
Now, those comments from Biden also came as the president really stepped up his rhetoric against Russian President Vladimir Putin over the course of this trip, calling him a war criminal and also a butcher for what he has done in Ukraine. We will see what further explanations the White House has in the coming days, including from President Biden himself, by what exactly he meant by those comments. Fred.
All right. Arlette Saenz at the White House. Thank you so much. So French President Emmanuel Macron, who has been acting as a go-between for the U.S., Europe, and Russia, reacted to President Biden's labeling of Vladimir Putin as a butcher, telling French television, quote, I wouldn't use terms like that because I'm still in talks with President Putin. Then adding, quoting now, our goal is to stop the war in Russia launched in Ukraine while avoiding a war and escalation, end quote. So let's bring in Ambassador William Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and is now a vice president for Russia and Europe at the United States Institute of Peace. So good to see you, Ambassador. So does President Macron have a good point?
I don't think so, Frederica. I think President Biden said what he thought. He said what many people think. Secretary Blinken, of course, is right. This is not a change in policy. There is no U.S. policy that calls for regime change. President Biden didn't say that. President Biden said this man cannot stay in power. That's a commonly held view probably around the world, maybe even in Russia, Frederica. But it is certainly the case that was a moral statement. It was not a policy statement.
However, does it carry more weight because it is the sitting president of the United States, the commander-in-chief?
Of course it does. Of course it does. And the sitting president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, has a responsibility to lead this nation. And he's doing that. And he's leading it in a moral way. This war that Russia is fighting against Ukraine in the first instance, but against all of us in the second interest, is immoral. It is unjustified. It is unprovoked.
On the issue
So the president is making that moral point.
I gotcha. And on the issue of the word choice that the president used at the end of his speech, saying, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, our former Moscow bureau chief and now contributor Jill Doherty said this in terms of the response in country of Russia, Russian media concentrating on, hashtag Biden gaffes, but then censoring in a way the actual words that Biden used, that, this man cannot remain in power. How does Putin leverage those comments coming from the United States president in country?
I think President Putin has a real problem. When the President of the United States says this man cannot stay in power, or the President of the United States says Putin is a war criminal, or the President of the United States says Putin is a butcher, that gets through to the Russian people. So Jill Doherty is exactly right. They don't want to get this. The Russians don't want to get this out. They don't want their people to hear that the President of the United States thinks that their president is a war criminal or a butcher or shouldn't remain in power. So I think this is actually a message not just to President Putin, but to the Russian people.
Following these talks in Europe involving the United States president, we didn't really hear out loud commitments that have now come as a result of these discussions, bilateral talks. But in your view, what perhaps may have been solidified as a result of these meetings so as to anticipate what might be next in Ukraine?
So one thing, Frederica, that I was very interested to hear was when President Zelensky spoke to the NATO summit, a couple of things he didn't ask for. He didn't ask for a no-fly zone. He just wants the equipment so that he can impose a no-fly zone. He didn't ask for NATO membership. He just wants security for his country. And for security for his country, he asked for security guarantees. So I think that is an interesting point that will go forward. How to secure Ukraine after this war ends. In my view, Ukraine will win this war. In fact, as President Biden, in a little noticed part of the speech just before his famous line about Putin he can't remain in power, just before that he said that Russia will not win in Ukraine, that Ukraine, by that implies, that means that Ukraine will win. And that's when we need to secure and provide security guarantees to the Ukrainians.
So that might bring some relief to the Ukrainian people that there would be these security guarantees after the war. And of course, they want to win this war. But in order to win this war, we keep hearing from the president of Ukraine who says, yes, they need resources. They need it now. While they may not have reiterated it within the last 24 hours, a need for the no-fly zone or even air power, I mean, clearly they still need a lot in order to win, in order to get to this securing of security later post-war.
Frederica, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And so the spigot of military equipment, of Stingers, of Javelins, of armored vehicles. We haven't seen many armored vehicles. They need armored vehicles. That spigot needs to go wide open, turn it totally open. And it needs to go, as you just said, it needs to go now. It is not good enough to come in 2 weeks or 3 weeks even. It needs to go now. That spigot needs to be flowing these equipment, as well as these missiles that can take out ships in the Black Sea or in the Sea of Azov. So there are things, there are military items of equipment, weapons, that the Ukrainians need right now, and they need them in great volume so that they can get to the other side.
All right, glad you could be with us. Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Federico.
And for more information about how you can help humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, go to cnn.com/impact, and we'll be right back.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
My name is Stephen Jameson, Global Head of Circular Economy Solutions at SAP. The aim of a circular economy is to eliminate waste, circulate materials, keep products in use as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. We're talking about a fundamental reworking of how we deliver the economy. At the moment, we're based upon an extractive system which depends upon nature, but is ultimately extractive. That will only go one way in the long term. A regenerative economy ultimately creates abundance of opportunity, abundance of materials, abundance of resources that enable us to thrive as a species and thrive as a piece of nature and as a part of nature.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
I'm Matt Rivers in Ciudad Acuña along the U.S.-Mexico border. This is CNN.
All right, the White House and Democrats are hoping to have Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court by early April. And if confirmed, she would be the first black woman on the nation's highest court. It's likely to be the closest Senate vote in history of the U.S. Supreme Court nominations. Judge Jackson underwent several days of long and sometimes contentious questioning from Republicans on Capitol Hill last week. And today on CNN, Senator Cory Booker weighed in on how she was treated during those hearings.
I got a chance to witness firsthand what I think many people in America can relate to, is when you show up in a room qualified, when you show up in a room with extraordinary expertise and credentials. There are a lot of Americans who know that hurt, that you are still going to be treated in a way that does not respect you fully. I think this is not about racism, it's about decency. And I think it's the kind of thing that a lot of folks, women of all races, have had to endure often when they get into a room that they're qualified to be in, but are yet questioned in ways that are disappointing.
For more on this, let's bring in CNN White House reporter Jasmine Wright. So, Jasmine, where does Jackson's nomination stand? What's happening ahead of the vote?
Well, Judge Jackson is all but guaranteed to be confirmed here. That's especially after Senator Joe Manchin came out in favor of her nomination, saying last week that he would support it. And remember, we know that Democrats want to get this done quickly. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has promised to bring a vote to the floor in short order, he said, but that can only happen after her nomination is advanced out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that vote is expected to happen around April 1st. So things will be happening, a lot of things will be happening really at the beginning of this next month. But one question going forward here, Fred, is whether or not she can garner Republican votes. Of course, she does not need them because they can pass her nomination along party lines with that 50-50 Senate. But of course, the White House would like some type of GOP involvement in this, some type of bipartisan support. So that's going to be the question going forward. But things will be happening soon. Right.
And Jasmine, of course, this confirmation vote, it's going to be historic, just as the hearings were. If confirmed, she will be the first black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. So what can you tell us about how her nomination came to be, her testimony, her service, and how all of this has served as a lot of inspiration for a lot of people?
Yeah, inspiration is the perfect word there. I talked to so many black women over the course of the last month, really, coming up to this hearing, coming up to this vote, and they talked all about how just from her example, they have seen their possibilities expanding. One 16-year-old girl told me that, just seeing her stand up there with President Biden in February when he nominated her, she knew that moment that she wanted to be a judge, and just everything that she's seen thus far has really confirmed that. And we know it is kind of the most intense version here of you have to see it to be it. You have to see it really to believe it, especially as we know that black women make up such a small share of attorneys in this country, just 5%, according to the American Bar Association in 2021. So it is just a very intense version of seeing this woman, Judge Ketanji Jackson, in her bright colors you see on the screen right here, really setting an example for these black women, showing them that if she can do it, they can do it too. And that's something that I heard over and over again from women from 16 years old to women 39. I talked to one woman who did not see a black attorney growing up. Her first example of a black attorney was seeing Claire Huxtable on TV. But now, after that first day of testimony, she knows that she can be a judge. And so I think that Ketanji Brown Jackson, she spoke really eloquently about that type of inspiration in her hearing. Take a listen to this moment when she talked about her first year at Harvard and that experience.
I'm from Miami, Florida. Boston is very cold. It was rough. It was different from anything I'd known. I was really questioning, do I belong here? Can I make it in this environment? And I was walking through the yard in the evening, and a black woman I did not know was passing me on the sidewalk. And she looked at me, and I guess she knew how I was feeling. And she leaned over as we crossed and said, "Persevere." I would tell them to persevere.
And so that really powerful moment, that is something that young black girls are seeing all across the country. And the women I talk to, they want to be a part of that generation that perseveres. Fred?
And I love Jasmine. You're right on CNN.com, so I encourage everybody to read it, because reading the quotes of the young ladies, in-season ladies that you spoke with, and just that sentiment, and then seeing that soundbite again, I mean, all of it just so powerful. Jasmine, thank you so much. All right, still ahead. Each day, more Ukrainians are fleeing the carnage in their country, but millions remain. Next, you will hear from the CEO of a Ukrainian pharmaceutical company who is sheltering 150 of his employees and their families at their plant in Kyiv.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for a market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Weekdays on CNN.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating,
connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
Every day, more Ukrainians are fleeing the carnage in this country. Yesterday alone, more than 5,200 escaped through humanitarian corridors, most of them from Mariupol. Hundreds were also evacuated from the Kyiv and Luhansk regions. CNN's Ed Lavandera joins me live here in Lviv. And Ed, a few hours ago, you were in Poland. You spent time in Poland. Poland is the country where the most Ukrainian refugees are going. Just tell us what you saw there.
Well, it's really changed dramatically in the last few weeks. You know, we were in the town of Przemyśl, which is about a 2-hour drive from where we are here in Lviv. The mayor told me at its peak we were seeing about 50 to 60,000 people crossing through that city alone. Those numbers have dropped off dramatically, but it's still pretty steady. At the train station, the mayor's office told us yesterday they were still getting about 1,000 a day. There's still several more thousand crossing by either foot or on bus at the border checkpoint a few miles away. So you're still seeing a steady flow of people. What is really fascinating is just the system that's been created to quickly move these people away from these small border towns further into Poland or Europe, wherever they might want to try to end up. So there's a system of, you know, buses and shelters. They spend maybe a night or get put on a train and they get moved to Warsaw or Krakow or Prague. So that system seems to be working rather well, and so it's kind of fascinating to watch it.
Do they have a choice? I mean, do they know where they're going next when they arrive there?
This is the I hope that our reporting from there has kind of conveyed the sense of, there are some people who have now talked to maybe a relative or a cousin and say, oh, they're in Prague or somewhere in Germany, and they maybe have a system. And there are countless people who are showing up there kind of looking around, waiting for a volunteer to guide them to the next checkpoint that will explain, here's where you can catch the bus, this is where the shelters are. The most heartbreaking and part of all of this is witnessing the number of elderly people who have shown up by themselves. So you imagine they're 75, 80, 85 years old. They've left their hometowns. Very often right now they're coming from far eastern Ukraine, and they've seen the worst of all of this. And they simply have no idea where they're going to end up. That's really been just staggering. But there's a strength that you see within them, right? They're sitting there, they're carrying 2 bags of whatever belongings they could grab, and they're trying to figure out what just the next couple of days is going to look like for them.
It takes so much strength to even get over the border to Poland. Yeah. But we've met people because they usually stop here before they get to you there. Right. And Ed, right there.
Yeah.
Welcome to Lviv, welcome to Ukraine. There's your first air raid siren. But this is why they're going. They're going to flee the danger that's in this country, because once you get over the border in Poland, you are safe.
Yeah, you hear, there's a sense of relief that you see from people. There's a sense of, confusion. There's also, a place where I think they start grasping for the first time just how much help and how much attention they're getting around the world. You cross the border and there's about a 300-yard kind of path that takes you to the buses, and that is lined with an array of international aid organizations that is really stunning to see. You have groups of Indian Sikhs cooking food for them. The one guy that stuck out to me, there's a Scottish guy in a kilt handing out freshly cooked pizza to the kids. That guy's the hit of the line. So I think that's the moment where it sticks to them. It's like the world is watching what's happening to them.
Look, love comes in many shapes and sizes and nationalities. Ed Lavandera, great to see you here. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
So while millions of Ukrainians are desperately fleeing the country, millions more remain. My next guest is among those staying behind with a critical mission. Dmytro Shymkiv joins me. He is live in Kyiv right now. He's the former deputy head of the presidential office of Ukraine and currently the CEO of Darnitsa. It's the largest Ukrainian pharmaceutical company. And Dmytro, I appreciate you joining us. You've got 150 employees and their families, including 37 children, living in a bomb shelter at a plant in Kyiv. Just tell me, how is that operating? What's the process down there? How is everyone surviving?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's critical that pharmaceutical industry deliver the necessary drugs for our employees, for our hospitals, for our doctors, for our patients. And this is very important that our employees get engaged. And of course, they are worried for their families. So during the night shifts they are working, they bring their loved ones with them. And we're trying to deliver on expectations for all hospitals and pharmacies that are all around the country. And we're shipping everywhere we can, take into account that there are locations which has difficulties of delivering a very critical medical supply, as today Mariupol or Chernihiv or Sumy.
Are you able to get supplies to these incredibly hard-hit areas?
Well, it's been a very difficult areas. First of all, the humanitarian corridors have not been working, so the people could not get in. The volunteers are trying to find the ways how to bring the very needed medicine across the kind of military. And it's been very, very challenging. We had a situation where we actually have to look for the volunteers, drivers who could drive the cars or the trucks with very critical pharmaceutical products to the hospitals. In Zaporizhia, we had a volunteer who delivered 340 kilograms of drugs, being shelled multiple times, and still delivered the necessary drugs. We see this kind of volunteers and active people who helped actually to bring the medicine down to the very needed places.
I mean, these are essential workers, right? We call them essential workers in the United States. People need this
Absolutely.
Product that you're putting out there because they're suffering. There's so much suffering around the country right now. How stressful is it for you, and how stressful is it for the people who have remained behind in Kyiv to do the work that needs to be done?
As you noticed, I'm sitting in the darkness, and our employees, we have to ensure the production which is taking place, because there is a high demand for all types of the drugs, from tablets, capsules, infusion, injectables, antibiotics, antipyretics, and so on and so on. And there is everybody is worried. Our employees are worried. Are they afraid to come to work? The sirens, we can hear the sirens. People have to some of the work we do is automatic. Something require presence of the operators. We have to maintain the quality control because we are. Producing pharmaceutical drugs is very critical, both from the needs, but also you need to adhere to the highest standards, GMP standards, which are good manufacturing practices. And everything we produce in today is actually adhering to the standards. And then you need to deliver it adhering to the standards, meaning maintaining temperature. So not every car can deliver this. So that's why cars being marked with red crosses and other signs that it is drugs. Nevertheless, they've been shelled and there have been challenges. But employees are extremely worried. There is psychological concerns. If you think about the kids, I have kids from 2 years old to 18, and we have to create a quasi so-called kindergarten for the small ones, and then we continue. The COVID taught us how to do online learning and online teaching. So there is an online school which is continue to happen for those who are who are older.
Right, Dmytro Shymkiv, thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our special live coverage continues right after the break.
follow a story, you may be asked to take risks. And sometimes go down a path that's not marked.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks and security forces firing tear gas.
When you dare to take risks, you witness passion and persistence.
And they just want to get their past be processed so they can get out of this facility.
And that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
They may look similar, they may taste similar, but sweet potatoes and yams have some differences. These root vegetables are not even related. True yams are native to Africa and Asia. Most yams today, 95%, are harvested in West Africa, while many of the yams sold in the U.S. are typically grown in Caribbean countries. And yams are closely related to lilies and grasses, while sweet potatoes are native to the Americas and are part of the morning glory family. Now, when it comes to your health, both of these root vegetables are low in calories and high in nutrients. 1/2 of a large sweet potato has just 81 calories, and the flesh of a medium baked sweet potato has enough vitamin A, that's in the form of beta carotene, to meet your entire recommended daily amount. Yams tend to be starchier. They also are good sources of nutrients like vitamin C.
For World Sport.
World Sport.
For World Sport, I'm Amanda Davis.
I'm Patrick Snell.
I'm Alex Thomas.
I'm Coy Wire.
I'm Don Riddell.
I'm Andy Scholl.
And this is CNN.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta in New York, and this is CNN.
Well, perhaps it's a scene reminiscent from the movie Titanic when a band played for passengers as the ship was sinking. Well, members of the Odessa Opera Troupe traded in their stage for a waiting area in the city's train station. The group performed upbeat patriotic songs and folk tunes, hoping to lift the spirits of refugees fleeing the city. And in a Missouri forest, wildland firefighters are forging a sisterhood in a field dominated by men. In today's Represented.
Most of my life has been spent as a wildland firefighter working for the Forest Service and the National Park Service for 35 years. In 2016, I made a very difficult decision knowing that I was putting everything on the line to go testify in front of Congress to talk about the harassment and gender